Welcome back to On Texas Football for this week's edition of Texas versus the SEC, brought to you by the good folks over at MyBookie. I'm CJ Vogel, joined as always by Gerry Hamilton and Gerry. We're going to take a quick look at the SEC standings, what's in store for the Longhorns moving forward. Also, how's that SEC championship race kind of heating up as we move into the final 2 weeks of the regular season. But more than anything, taking a look at what's the SEC going to look like in 2025 and beyond? Which teams have increased their stock, and also which teams might be in for a bit of a rehaul or a rebuild moving forward with some coaching decisions, player personnel moving as well. But before we move into anything, Gerry, a quick word about our sponsor, MyBookie, over here at On Texas Football for this week's Texas versus the SEC.
No doubt. This episode's brought to you by MyBookie. With all the excitement around the season, make sure you're in the game with MyBookie. Bet any matchup, hundreds of college player props, and take advantage of weekly risk-free bets. The best part is you can do it all, anytime, anywhere, straight from your phone. Visit mybookie.ag and use promo code ONTEXAS to get started. It's MyBookie's 10th year anniversary, and we're rolling out the red carpet for bettors. Bet big, and bet confident with risk-free Thursdays. If your boosted bet doesn't hit, you'll get your money back. Weekly, no sweat, win-win bets all season long. And sign up now using my On Texas, all caps, to cash in on double deposit bonus. It's a no-brainer. Double the cash in your account before you even ever place your first bet. But do not wait on it, because it's only available for a limited time. For those of you who have been playing with MyBookie, they've got something for you too, a brand new loyalty rewards program in MyBookie Plus. It's simple. The more you play, the more you earn. And as you progress through the tiers, unlock exclusive promotions, epic giveaways, and cash back in your account.
Perfect. Thank you, Gerry, and thank you again, MyBookie, for sponsoring Texas versus the SEC. All right, it's week 13. Everybody's played 10 games so far, Gerry. I know that we'll take a look here at the SEC standings currently. Texas sitting 5-1 in conference, tied with Texas A&M up at the top. But this far into the season, I wanted to ask you this. You got 6 teams theoretically still alive for a trip to go to Atlanta for the SEC championship game. Is that what you expected coming into the year? Is this many teams still alive this late in the season?
I thought there might be 5. I think the one team that has kind of jumped past the expectations in year one's Elko at A&M. I think everybody would say if you took A&M and put them right there with South Carolina at 7-3 with two conference losses right now, you'd say, yeah, that still stacks up about like you'd think, right? But A&M added that 6th team to the equation. Maybe they replaced Missouri or LSU, so you figured there'd be 6 teams, but maybe it's just A&M being there and Missouri or LSU not being there that's the change. But look, last week we had a huge game, Tennessee at Georgia, right? And yet Alabama at LSU. You've had some really big games. It seems like every week's a playoff game the last 3 weeks of the year, and it's really setting up. The one thing I did not expect, CJ, we joked about it. I talked about it on Coffee and Football a lot. We talked about it on shows. Hey, the one scenario out there, the year the rivalry comes back, is A&M and Texas playing for like all the marbles.
Yeah.
And we're a week away from a winner-take-all type of game, with the winner going to the SEC championship and being guaranteed a playoff berth as long as Texas A&M wins at Auburn, Texas beats Kentucky. That's the one scenario I joked about, talked about, but didn't really think it was going to happen.
It certainly is feeling that way. Of course, Texas will play Kentucky Saturday at 2:30. Texas A&M will head to Auburn. Will play under the lights at Jordan-Hare. It's a tough environment, but yes, to your point, it is shaking up to be a Texas A&M winner-take-all matchup, and that's exciting. I think that's great for the rivalry. It's great to get this game back off of timelines and onto the gridiron. It'll be exciting, but beyond that, you got 4 teams right now with 2 losses, and the conversation everywhere is, well, with Texas, and you're hearing it in the SEC, but also Indiana and the Big Ten. Are these jumbo conferences good long-term for when it comes to established resumes, when it comes to making sure that the level of difficulty and variance in conferences is sustainable to a given season? Whereas, you see Georgia up there having to play Clemson on top of Tennessee, Alabama, Ole Miss, Texas. That's significantly tougher, I would say, than what Texas has had to go through. Texas A&M, Missouri, also on the easier side. What's the solution, if there is one, to making sure that level of balance is sustained throughout the entire conference? Do you have anything in mind?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's going to have to be better schedule balance, but it's hard. I mean, that's the one thing that's hard because you look at a Texas schedule, right? And Oklahoma is going to go 5-7. Now, that's not a normal Oklahoma season, right? If that's an 8-4, 9-3 team, that looks different. Kentucky was thought to be they were ranked at, I think, 22nd in the preseason polls. They're 4-6, 1-6 in conference play. So I'm not sure you can ever get it exactly right. But there is no doubt there's going to have to be a little better schedule balance moving forward, because if we're just being honest, and it doesn't matter who we cover, Oklahoma has a much more difficult schedule than Texas in year one in the SEC.
Right.
I don't think anybody would argue that, including Steve Sarkisian. So I think there's going to have to be better schedule balance long term. How you get there is the question, because you can't realistically predict how these teams are going to fare, because that too many of them beat up on each other.
I agree. It's a fun conversation for some, maybe not so much for Texas fans this year. Last question before we start talking about whose stocks are up and whose stocks are down moving forward. I'm looking at it now. Texas is on a 3-game win streak. Ole Miss is on a 3-game win streak. Alabama's on a 3-game win streak. When you kind of evaluate who's still alive to go to Atlanta, who's playing the best ball right now of anybody in the conference that's still alive here?
Man, you put out, I feel like you and I'll put out the ultimate jinx in this. But it's hard to say after the last couple of games, Ole Miss isn't.
Right.
I mean, they go to Arkansas and put 63 on them and decide, we've given them enough. We're going to get on the plane and go home. Then they beat Georgia soundly. I mean, who's playing better than Ole Miss right now? Nobody. But again, they're playing at Florida in 48 hours, so I probably just jinxed them in this conference. Where are you going with it, CJ?
I was going to go with Ole Miss as well. It does feel like Alabama has found out its identity. Yeah. And I think that's something that evaded them the first 6 or so weeks of the season, right? What is this team? You get out to a big early lead against Georgia, you squander it, you find a way to win that game, but it's been rocky, right? You have 2 losses on the season. It's not necessarily the Alabama teams of past that we've seen. So they're finding their rhythm right now as well. With that said, I love what Ole Miss has been doing recently. So hard not to rock with Lane Kiffin and the Rebels.
Well, I mean, CJ, the reason I say that, by the way, and I'd be interested in your opinion on this as well, thoughts on this. They don't just rush the passer. They look like an NFL team rushing the passer. Yes, I mean, that's like 5 or 6 different guys can get after you. That's pretty significant. And Jackson Dart is playing at a pretty high level right now.
Think about it. I mean, Princely Uman-Milan, Jared Ivey, Walter Nolan, that front line defensively is superb. It's as deep as you'll find in the SEC. It's as potent as anybody that you'll find in the entire country. And they got a quarterback that can sling the rock a little bit with Trey Harris and some wide receivers that can
and really Suntarine Perkins at linebacker, taking that massive jump in year 2 in college football. I mean, this was a guy who was a former, may have been 5-star with some people, top 50 kid for sure. He has 10 sacks on this team. That's an incredible number, which means he leads the SEC in sacks, which means he's a half a sack ahead of Princely. And he's a linebacker on this team. Yeah. So add him to what you're saying about the defensive front, and J.J. Pegues is a run stopper who can also pass rush from the interior. And they literally can come at you in waves rushing the passer. There's not another team in America like that.
I completely agree. But listen, you still got 2 games to go. Of course, we might have just jinxed Ole Miss all the way.
We did.
Going into Swamp this weekend, that'll be an interesting game at 11 a.m. on ABC on Saturday. But moving forward, I wanted to get to this part of the conversation. Texas versus the SEC. It's year 1 for Texas in the conference. Yep. So far, so good, right? You have the 1 loss to Georgia. I think everybody coming into the year, with the exceptions of a few, might have predicted this to be exactly the case. You're 9-1. You have 1 conference loss. It is to Georgia. But long-term wise, things are shaking out well, right? Texas in a position to land a top 3, top 5 class in all the country again this year. You start stacking some classes. Things bode well when you do that in the SEC. But I want to start with a few other teams in the conference. Yeah. What does that mean for 2025 and beyond? Are you buying their stock? Are you selling their stock moving forward? I'll start with some rivals in the conference. We'll start with Oklahoma. How about that? Not convincing there, Jerry.
I'm selling. You're in an OC change again, which means your back's against the wall. Your quarterback position is unsettled. You've done a good job recruiting defensive players, but I'm here to tell you, you're about to lose one of the best players in the country that nobody talks about, Danny Stutzman.
Right.
He's really good. You're going to lose a couple of guys out of that secondary. Who knows who's coming back at wide receiver, the guys that have been hurt. You just don't know. I'm selling Oklahoma. I think they're recruiting well, but they're just too many questions and unsettled parts of that program for me, CJ. What about you?
Who knows what's returning at wide receiver? Who knows what's returning at quarterback, right? I think above anything else, you have to come in with a brand new offensive coordinator. You would like there to be some continuity there with a quarterback, perhaps. But with that said, are you going to expect that entire system, that offense, that offensive line, the wide receivers, running back hasn't been good in several years there. That offense needs a complete rejuvenation of talent, and that's a lot to ask for.
And let's remember this: their schedule flips next year, so they go to South Carolina, Bama, and Tennessee.
Yeah,
that's not going to be fun.
Absolutely, and they get LSU at home, so I think that's actually a good jumping-off point for Oklahoma. I'm selling them as well, and I think I'm going to be selling LSU as well here. This conversation about Brian Kelly, it's been getting louder over the years. It wasn't a great fit when they hired him in my eyes, and 3 years in, you're not seeing the steps that every other LSU head coach has taken the past 25 years, to the point where now those whispers might be getting a little bit louder out of Baton Rouge. Who knows what the future 3-6 months might entail, but right now I'm not buying a bright future with Garrett Nussmeier and Kyron Lacy departing after this year.
Yeah, that's the tough thing is if you're not going to be a personality fit of the job, you have to win big, right? Else the fans are going to turn on you because they didn't think it was a great fit to begin with. I think Brian Kelly's a really good football coach. Sometimes it's not a good fit. The key is holding their recruiting class together at the end here. I mean, if they can hold enough of those pieces together and do enough in the portal, Brian Kelly's such a good coach. I don't know if I can go sell all the way. I'm on the fence, but I guess this season has me leaning to sell a little bit because I just think they're going to be young at quarterback next year unless they go portal. They're going to be young on the defensive interior as they try to rebuild that defense. They're going to be young in the secondary more than likely, or if the same guys that are back, they better be a lot better. I'm going to sell them as well, even though I hate to sell a guy who's a really good football coach and is a proven winner, but I'm going to sell them right now.
Yeah, I think the conversation with LSU coming into the year is going to be tough to replace a Heisman winning quarterback and 2 first-round wide receivers. They did a pretty good job of that with Nussmeier and Lacy, though that offense still had its lapses, and that defense just didn't quite take the step forward.
And they're going to lose both their tackles to the NFL on offense as well, and probably one interior guy. Will Campbell's maybe he may be a first tackle off the board. They got a lot they're going to have to replace, and I just don't know if they're equipped from an NIL perspective to do what Ole Miss did in the portal.
It'll be interesting. So I'm selling Oklahoma and LSU. I wanted to knock out a few teams, maybe at the bottom of this SEC conference so far. Kentucky comes to town. I'll pitch you Kentucky as well as South Carolina. Those 2 teams that South Carolina not at the bottom of the conference, but hey, are either of what those teams doing expected in 2025 with Lenore Sellers and Brock Vandegrift at the helm, or can you expect maybe some turbulence for either program?
I'm selling Kentucky because I think Stoops has done a great job. 2 10-win seasons of 4 in history. I think he may have peaked there with Texas and OU coming into the SEC, and they're not equipped NIL-wise right now in football. They are in basketball, but they're not in football to compete at the top half of this conference. And if they're not, until we go to profit sharing, if they're not, then how are they going to really rise in this conference? I mean, right. It's a tough conference to really ascend in if you're starting from back of the pack. But this season, the other thing too is, and I know A&M came and tried to hire Stoops, but when a coach and the players and the program and the fans know he was going to leave for another job, it's hard. I just think it's a difficult situation. On the flip side, CJ, I'm buying South Carolina.
Yeah.
So Lenora Sellers, redshirt freshman. You can win a lot of college football games with that guy and that scheme. Dylan Stewart. Now, they got to keep guys in the NIL day and age. They got to keep them from going into the portal. Dylan Stewart's a surefire first rounder. They have good players around it. I think they do a good job evaluating in the portal. as well, which is underrated when you look at South Carolina. I think they're going to, win for Kevin Wynn late in the recruiting cycle, a 4-star defensive lineman out of Georgia. I think they're getting enough pieces. I'm buying South Carolina. Their toughest thing, CJ, is holding on the Beamer.
And I completely agree. And I liked your point about their portal additions as well as portal subtractions, right? We actually heard Shane Beamer earlier this week come out and say, you know what? And Juice Wells said he wanted to go out to brighter pastures. Okay, we got a good quarterback. We know what we have in this system.
Yeah.
If you don't want to be a part of it, we'll find someone who does. And right now, with the pieces that they have, Nicholas Harbor obviously making a name for himself at wide receiver as well. They seem to be a team that's got it kind of figured out with their demographic, with where they are on the pecking order of NIL. They make it work somehow, some way. And I think that's something that is sustainable when you have a quarterback that fits the system. Real quick, before we move into some of the top dogs in the conference, is Vanderbilt, are they for real moving forward, Jerry? Can we trust that the Commodores are going to be sticking around, being a thorn in sides for people?
I think they do. They also do a really good job in evaluation. We'll see if they caught lightning in a bottle with Diego and Eli. I think the Johnson, the backup quarterback, was a highly recruited kid that transferred from Utah. I think they make good decisions in recruiting and in the portal, but sustaining it at Vanderbilt has always been the toughest task. I mean, James Franklin got out as soon as he could. So the thing is, if you have 2 good seasons, you better portal out yourself as a staff.
I was going to say, I don't want to liken them to Last Chance U, but it feels like the way that they've kind of accumulated some of that talent is guys not necessarily having other places to go, yet still wanting to remain in that SEC level. That might always be a market, but can you find ways to get a quarterback to line up with an offensive line and a system that's, kind of maximizes their strength? I think right now I'll be selling the future 2025 season of Vanderbilt again, just because Diego Pavia is that special. Moving up.
Hugh Freeze is selling them next year too without Diego.
Speaking of which, Auburn might be an interesting team. Recruiting is still going well for Auburn despite the season not going that well. They have some NIL money to play with. Is that going to be enough to turn the program around? It kind of feel like we're having this conversation again with Auburn with what's been the case for the last 3 years or so.
Yeah, if they finish off this recruiting class and can get a quarterback in the portal, I think they're a team that can turn it around. I actually, as crazy as it sounds, if you look at their season, and so much does depend on if they sign all these guys they have committed, because they have a top 5 level class.
Right.
And they have a bunch of NFL players on the defensive line in this class. And like Jared Smith, the 4-star edge, top 50 in the country, could flip to Ole Miss. I mean, there's some things going on there. But all their we'll see what happens with A&M, but all their losses at home have been close. They haven't been blown out. It's not like they're a terrible football team. They're 4-6 with self-inflicted. It's all over the fourth quarters of all these games.
Improved quarterback play would take that team to a significantly different level.
I could see this team going from 5-7 or 4-8 if they lose to A&M and Alabama, 4-8 to 8-4 in the blink of an eye. So I'm actually going to buy Auburn because Hugh Freeze has done this. He's done it before. He did it at Ole Miss. He won once he got the players in there. He won. He proved he could do it. He beat Nick Saban 2 years in a row. Yeah. I'm going to crazily buy Hugh Freeze and Auburn right now.
My buy or sell with Auburn and Hugh Freeze, it's going to be contingent on the quarterback. It always has been, and hitching your wagon to Peyton Thorne, I think from the beginning was a mistake, but you live and you learn. And right now, I think Auburn, having as much success as they are in the recruiting in the portal world, I think above anything else, they realize that quarterback has to be a priority, and they've got to go get that right. And they have to do it immediately, in my eyes, for 25. Otherwise, you might be looking at another coaching change up in Auburn. But talk to me a little bit about Georgia, because this isn't the Kirby Smart Georgia that we've seen. Maybe defensively it's shown some life of what it's been in their dynastic run, but Carson Beck hasn't lived up to it, and these wide receivers and the pass catchers certainly have taken a step back. Are we to believe that Georgia is going to continue to be the Georgia that we've seen over the last decade or so?
I think yes. I'm going to continue to buy Georgia, especially in a 12-team playoff, because they're going to be one of the 2 most talented rosters in the country. As long as Kirby's there, the state is ridiculously talented. They can go recruit in Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, They can dip into Texas at times. I mean, two of their future starters on defense are Oak Ridge kids, just not the Oak Ridge boys, Oak Ridge kids, Justin Williams and Joseph Jonah Ajonye. Georgia thinks both those guys are first, second round level guys in the NFL draft one day. I'm going to buy them. You know what's crazy, though? Who's going to be their quarterback next year?
Mm-hmm.
Is it Jaden Rashada? I mean, who's it going to be? Losing Jared Curtis? Interesting in 2026, right? But I'm going to buy Georgia because they're just going to have a top 3 roster in the country as long as Kirby's there.
I agree, and I think very much of what we were talking about with Georgia could be said about Alabama, right? Jalen Milroe expected to depart. Is it going to be Ty Simpson? Is it going to be Austin Mack? Who's to be the head of the Crimson Tide offense? And that tutelage of Kalen DeBoer, that means something, right? We saw it with Michael Penix. We saw it, when he was at Indiana, kind of leading that program with Penix and without to heights that they hadn't seen until Cignetti. What's the future of Alabama? Are you buying the future of the Tide?
Buying big. Kalen DeBoer has a track record. I think they're doing a really good job in recruiting and evaluation. I really like their class. And I'll say this. He brought Austin Mack from Washington to Alabama with him, knowing a very talented kid like Julian Sand would leave. So that guy must think Austin Mack is a future NFL quarterback. And if Kalen DeBoer has an NFL quarterback, a passer, a natural passer, it's an NFL quarterback with the talent he can get at Alabama, I would be an idiot not to buy them.
I got 2 more for you before we start talking about Texas and Texas A&M. But Ole Miss, did they catch lightning in the bottle? It feels like this might be a Florida State 2023 season with all these portal additions. But I feel like to discredit what the Grove can do NIL-wise would be a little short-sighted.
Yeah, I'm still buying Ole Miss. Now, I'm not buying Ole Miss as 10-2 next year necessarily, but I'm buying Ole Miss because I think Lane Kiffin and these guys have proven that they have a pretty good formula right now, and they're going to recruit well enough at the high school level. I mean, flipping 5-star Caleb Cunningham, the in-state receiver from Bama, is saying something. They'll probably flip another kid or two, but what they did in the portal, not only can they compete in the portal from an NIL perspective, but they ended up making good decisions, like Chris Paul, the linebacker from Arkansas, right? Princely out of Florida. I mean, Walter Nolan, that was always going to be, some people were going to say yay, some people were going to say no. And in fact, more people said no than yay on him. But, Juice Wells got him healthy. You look at that, you look at their offensive line. I think they made good decisions there. So they've proven to me that they're making good decisions in the portal on their fits and the right caliber players. I'm buying Ole Miss. I'm not sure I buy them at 10-2 like I predict they'll finish this year, but I am buying them under Kiffin.
I might be a little opposite of that. With Ole Miss, can you sustain a talent that is going to see turnover from year to year to year via the portal? They did this year, but even then, a loss to Kentucky, maybe some moments throughout the year where you were expecting a little bit more. You have a third-year quarterback in the system. Is this the maximum ceiling for them? If so, I don't know if this is going to be something that they can duplicate in 25 and beyond because of the success that they came out of the portal with. One on the opposite hand, I think Tennessee is a team that I'm going to be buying moving forward because I feel like what they've done high school recruiting wise is a little bit more sustainable than that of Ole Miss. Finding key talent guys at the trenches, positions of need. Obviously, quarterback is a big one. That's a program right now that I'm looking at saying, okay, I can see why they would be successful moving forward the next 3 or 4 years.
I totally agree. They're always going to recruit inside the top 15, and threaten inside the top 10 in recruiting classes, multiple years. I buy them as well. A big thing for me is, what's the next 2 years with Nico going to look like? Because he's not going to play one more season and go pro. He's not even close. What's the next 2 seasons with Nico? What type of growth are you going to see from year 1 to year 2 and year 2 to year 3? Normally the biggest jump is year 1 to year 2. So that makes me a buyer of Tennessee because Nico has a high ceiling. And you got to think, even though he's not a naturally accurate passer, and the decision at the end of the Arkansas game still baffles me, but as just a football guy, I don't care if you played one down of football. That was pretty obvious with 6 seconds left coming out of a timeout. I'm still going to buy Tennessee for the reasons you said, high school recruiting. Great fan base there. I think Josh Heupel's got a good system. They're always going to play good defense. They're going to be physical in the run game, and they have a young quarterback.
Of course, before we get to Texas and Texas A&M, Jerry, one more word about MyBookie, the sponsor for Texas versus the SEC this week.
Yeah, go visit mybookie.ag and use the promo code ONTexas to get started. It's MyBookie's 10th year anniversary, and they're rolling out the red carpet for bettors. Bet big and bet confident with risk-free Thursdays. If your boosted bet doesn't hit, you'll get your money back. Weekly no sweat, win-win bets all season long. Again, that's visit mybookie.ag. Use promo code ONTexas.
Of course. Thank you, MyBookie, and for sponsoring Texas versus the SEC. Thank you, Jerry, as well. Quick word on Texas A&M because, hey, they surprised some folks. They maybe exceeded some expectations in year one under Mike Elko, but very much like what we've talked about with Auburn, I think a lot of their success depends on the quarterback. Are you buying A&M's ability to go out and find the right fit, or is it just Marcel Reed and what he can bring to this team?
I'm definitely buying A&M. And look, I say the same things about A&M I do about Texas, and that doesn't mean I don't think Texas has a slightly higher ceiling, because I do. Both programs, to me, don't have an excuse not to be they should be a playoff team 3 out of every 4 years. And when it goes to 16 teams, 4 out of every 5, because they are set up with talent in state, NIL out the kazoo, good, solid coaching staff. Mike Elko's a good football coach. He's brought a physical style of football there, and he's brought discipline. He's changed the culture there. It's obvious they wouldn't be winning like they are if he hadn't done a good job there. And I think they're doing a very good job in high school recruiting. They're always going to be really good on defense. Now, they lose some big-time guys on defensive front this year, but they're always going to be good on defense. They're going to be competitive, and some of their other positions will get better as he has more time there. But I just think the setup's there. And this is why I sold OU, by the way, because A&M and Texas have not both been sustained good at the same time in a long time, since before C.J. Vogel was born.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I mean, that's another reason I'm selling Oklahoma. It's going to be more difficult than ever for them to get the talent they need out of Texas to have sustained success. Because I'm here to tell you, I think Texas and Texas A&M are.
It sounds like it on the recruiting pitch as well. And for both teams to be in the hunt for the playoff, in the hunt for the SEC championship game, while Oklahoma kind of squanders around 500, to your point, that means something. I'm buying A&M as well long-term. I think Elko, to your point, has a lot of discipline and culture, whereas the previous regime in College Station kind of took that for granted, or at least turned a blind eye to some of the issues that showed up on Saturdays. And finally, Jerry, we've talked about it on the recruiting breakdown. We've talked about it on live streams, but Texas in another position to land a top 3, maybe 1, maybe 5 class in the entire country this year. That feels like they're doing something right in recruiting. We know that their success rate out of the portal has been second to none as well. What are your thoughts long-term about Texas, also with maybe some key departures on the offensive line, defensive line, whatever? What's 2025 looking like for you as well?
I think Steve Sarkisian, you don't have to worry about offense. I mean, it doesn't mean it's always pretty if your quarterback doesn't play well, but you don't have to worry about offense. I mean, still, you didn't go up to Arkansas and lose 10-7. Right? I mean, you don't have to worry about that. You're going to get good players. You're going to have good wide receivers. You're going to have a fun style of offense. The quarterback room will be good as long as Sark is there. I think the offensive line, they're on a good track for development there, which is big for me. Not having to go into the portal, but just continue to develop those kids from the high school level, because I think the portal and the offensive line gets very tricky. Defensively, look, I think they have a really solid, connected staff, which creates connected players. And if there's infighting on a staff, there's infighting on the field, and you're just not seeing it. And I think they're doing a tremendous job in evaluation as a whole, as a program. And if you do that at the high school level, develop enough of those guys, which they're showing they can develop players right now under Torrey Becton and Sark's plan, and they're going to do well in the portal, a blue blood in the portal. I absolutely buy Texas. And look, I really believe this is, even though they'll probably lose 4 offensive line starters this year, I can see a scenario where they're a better team next year. And I know that's going to sound crazy to people, but we got to wait to see what happens in the portal. But I see a scenario where Texas may even be better next year than this year.
Oof, that's a pretty lofty comment there, Jerry. But hey, if Texas continues to stack talent and hit on the portal, I don't think it's outrageous with some of the guys that are going to be key pieces. The third year Manny Muhammad, third year Derek Williams, third year Anthony Hill, Colin Simmons back, and hey, Arch Manning. We know what he's been able to do.
Ryan Wingo. I mean, see what Cedric Baxter does coming back. I mean, that was a huge loss for this team. And people didn't think about it was in August because a lot of the fan base just said, oh, Jaden Bull will just go rush for 1,400 yards. There's a reason why Texas was doing what they were doing with Cedric Baxter, because he was the best running back on the program. So what was he going to be like next year? What are some of these young players? There's young talent in this program. We know it, CJ. We saw them in high school. How are those guys going to develop? And I just think Texas is going to find more future NFL draft picks in the portal.
Yes.
So they're going to have guys that come in for 1 year, maybe 2 that are NFL players. And this roster is just going to have 35, 40 NFL players on it every year, as long as Sark has this thing rolling. And yeah, I could see them being better. I know it sounds crazy, but I can.
Well, we're buying Texas then. That makes 2 of us. Should be interesting to see how the next 2 weeks of the regular season finish out, and then what's beyond that. A trip to Atlanta, a trip to the college football playoff. We'll see. Obviously, Texas has to get a win against Kentucky on Senior Day at DKR first before we can look ahead to anything the rest of this year or to 2025 and beyond. But, Jerry, thank you so much for the time. This has been On Texas Football, and it's a weekly edition of Texas versus the SEC brought to you by MyBookie. For Gerry Hamilton, I'm CJ Vogel. Y'all have a good one. Hook 'em.